Advocate Anand Kumar, this side. I am going to be your host and the moderator for today's session. On behalf of our team, AP Legal Chambers, and on my personal behalf, I welcome you all to this 8th webinar of the series titled Ram Janmabhoomi Case Study, Legal Principles Flowing from the Judgment by our special speaker, Senior Advocate R. Balasubramanian, Supreme Court of India. First things first, we thank the participants for their continuous support. We request the participants to mute their audios and if possible, disable their videos too. The session is completely moderated one, and once the presentation gets over, the special speaker's presentation gets over, APLC's APLC segment and the question answer segment would follow. If you have any questions to ask our speaker, you can leave them in the chat box, and if time permits, all your questions will be answered. With each passing webinar, we are trying our best to improve and raise one step further. Intense research, coordination, management, and a lot of time goes into organizing these webinars. But we do not feel the heat or any kind of pressure because of the positive response and participation from you people. We owe the entire credit of this webinar to our special speaker, Mr. Balasubramanian. After all, we are just setting up a stage for the speaker to connect with the participants and vice versa. As a formal introduction about the organizers for this event, we are Team AP Legal Chambers, a new age law firm in Delhi and NCR with its branch office in Chennai. Things started falling in place in 2017, and we had committed ourselves of providing plenary services to our clients and trying to resolve their legal issues. APLC has been providing specialized services in the areas of domestic and international taxation, constitutional laws, IPR, energy law, commercial advisory, arbitration, and corporate compliances. We started organizing these webinars out of our passion for law, and due to the extremely positive response from the participants, we are organizing the webinar series every Thursdays and Sundays. In today's webinar, we shall be covering the all-important and landmark judgment in the recent past Ram Janmabhoomi case and the legal principles involved in the judgment. Before I move any further, I would like to make one thing clear to all the audience of this topic today. We shall be discussing completely the topic will be completely based on the legal periscope only. I request our learned and smart audience to refrain themselves from commenting any unrelated topic to this webinar or anything communal or post any controversial topics in the comment. Any questions relevant to this today's topic shall be taken up for discussion. Other kindly excuse. As always, once the speaker's presentation gets over, we shall be having this segment called APLC's APLC, Ask the Popular Learned Counsel. We have prepared a few questions from our end and would be asking them to the speaker. I am sure it will be both interesting and informative. If there was one case in the history of post-independent India which created India-wide tension and worldwide attention, without an iota of doubt, this would be the Ram Janmabhoomi case. We are taking up the same for today, and the case study will be from a completely different angle. My association with this case to a very large extent was limited to following up this matter in televisions, newspapers, and internet and reading the order copies, etc. Just like a common man, I was thinking of what would be the outcome of the case right from when I was in my graduation, then post-graduation, and in the beginning of my practice under my senior. God was kind enough to me, and I moved to Delhi and started practicing in Delhi High Court. And I had opportunities to visit the Honorable Supreme Court of India from 2015 onwards. In one such instance, this case was in progress in CJI's courtroom, and I had an instant connect and lucky to have witnessed the court proceedings. Slowly, I was getting interested in this case and started going to Honorable Supreme Court on those hearing days. Then, as you all know, there was a 40 days marathon hearing, and just like a small kid running for a candy, I started running behind this case. 9th November 2019 was a red letter day for me because hundreds of advocates and I and people from the press were there in the usually not so suffocating room number 1 in the Supreme Court of India. Though the larger than life image of the case made us sweat in the even the harsh winters of the Delhi. I was there, flesh and blood, and was witnessing history unfold before me in front of my eyes, and I listened to the judgment read by our CJI. Coming back to today's discussion, we have in our midst special speaker, senior advocate R. Balasubramanian, to share his views and also to talk about the legal principles involved in this judgment. Senior advocate R. Balasubramanian has over 37 years of experience in the field of law, and he has handled a number of cases relating to constitutional law, administrative law, service jurisprudence, labor laws, and criminal law. He has served the nation as an army officer before deciding to protect national interest as an advocate in the highest court of our country. In the year 1985, Mr. Balasubramanian joined the Army's Judge and Advocates General Department. He was awarded the Vishisht Seva Medal in 2006 by the President for his distinguished service. A globetrotter, Mr. Balasubramanian also served in the United Nations as its legal advisor, winning commendations from the Special Representative of the UN General Secretary and Force Commander United Nations for exceptional devotion to peacekeeping duties in the United Nations mission in Ethiopia and Eritrea. He was thrice awarded the Chief of Army Staff Commendation as well as the Vice Chief of the Army Staff and Army Commander Eastern Command Commendations. In 2006, he came back to the practice, and in the recent past, he has defended in the important cases relating to acquisition of Rafale fighter jets, SC/ST Act amendment case, appointment of DG Armed Forces Medical Services, reservation issues, appointment and service conditions of members of various tribunals, etc. Being an ex-army officer, our speaker has domain expertise in law relating to armed forces, paramilitary forces, and has successfully defended the interests of the Union of India in number of cases in the Honorable Supreme Court. Our speaker has number of reported cases wherein he has appeared and argued before the Honorable Supreme Court of India and various high courts and tribunals. Ladies and gentlemen, this is only one page of his achievement, which I have presented to you. The accomplishments are endless, but the time is limited. Without delaying any further, I welcome our special speaker to AP Legal Chambers webinar. I am also eagerly waiting to hear from our speaker. Welcome on board, and over to you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, AP Legal Chambers. Good evening to everybody. Before I make my presentation, I would like to actually extend a very warm welcome to all the viewers who, in spite of your busy schedule, you all have gathered to interact with us. AP Legal Chambers, when they approached me, I readily agreed. I found in Anand a very bright and enthusiastic advocate who has got a lot of immense potentials. Having said that, when he asked me as to what should be the topic, I said, let us actually discuss this particular judgment. Apart from the interest that the judgment has generated world over, this is one judgment which has laid down not only certain legal principles, but most importantly, a litigation which was actually going on for the last about 70 years was put to an end to. On paper, it is a litigation of 70 years, but otherwise, the dispute is more than 3 to 4 centuries old. It's a watershed as far as the Honorable Supreme Court is concerned. It's a watershed judgment in the history of Indian judicial history for a number of reasons. I will make this presentation in 2 parts. In part 1, I will actually give a brief background, including the history of the dispute, the various cases that were filed, what were the outcome before the High Court, and then how it traveled to the Supreme Court. Then in part 2, I will deal with the legal principles which are flowing from the judgment. Why I am giving this brief background is the legal principles which the court has laid down, we will be in a position to appreciate it better in case if you know that what is the factual background as presented before the court in various pleadings, documents, and the arguments presented before the Supreme Court. So therefore, it is very important when you apply the legal principles contextually as to how the case has progressed over a period of time. We all know that this Ram Janam Bhoomi or Ram Janmasthan, in whichever way you call it, this is one case which has generated enormous interest, not only in Hindu community, but also amongst the Muslims, because for Hindus, Ram Janmasthan or Ram Janmabhoomi is, according to firm faith and belief, is the place where Bhagwan Ram was born. So therefore, it holds a very, very special significance as far as the birthplace is concerned. For Muslims, it is again one of the most important masjid, Babri Masjid, which according to them was built under the instructions of Emperor Babur. It was built, they say, by one of the trusted generals, Mir Bakwi, and it was built in 1528, 1528 AD, almost 450 years back. Now, such being the position, the masjid, according to them, was dedicated for offering prayers and holding celebrations so far as the Muslim community is concerned. So therefore, it holds a very, very special significance and place as far as Muslims are concerned. Now, given such a situation, it was extremely a very, very tough and challenging task for the Supreme Court because of the enormous sensitivity and also the interest that the case has generated. And especially after the High Court had divided the property into 3 segments, giving 1/3 each to 3 other parties, which we will see a little later. Therefore, apart from the sensitivity and the interest, it was also a very, very challenging because history, culture, architecture, archaeology, religion, you name a thing, everything was involved. It was not such an easy task running through almost 15,000 pages of evidence. According to the judgment, there were 88 witnesses who were examined before the trial court, that is the High Court. Then 533 exhibits were marked. The exhibits comprised of photographs, literature, books, reference books in all types of languages, Hindi, Persian, Urdu, Sanskrit, then French, English, you name, there were so many books, thousands and thousands of books which were referred to, literature was referred. And similarly, the number of witnesses, apart from witness to the facts of the case, there were witnesses relating to history experts, then anthropology, epigraphy, You name a thing, and in fact everything was there. So it was a very, very challenging task for the High Court judges to sift through the evidence and render a judgment which was running into 4,300 pages. You can see the enormity of the challenge which was before the judges. And thereafter, to fight out such a matter before the Honorable Supreme Court, it was a further uphill task which was done commendably both by the lawyers representing the Hindu community, led by our Reverend, that is learned Attorney General, former Attorney General Mr. Parasaran sir, and on the other side, equally capable Dr. Rajiv Dhawan. Now, as I said that in part 1, I will deal with the history of this dispute. Now, we have to go back in history. They said that the Muslims claimed that the Babri Masjid was built somewhere around 1528. But during the trial, neither in their pleadings nor in the trial, they could not lead any evidence. They could not even actually aver as to how this was actually donated to the Muslims or gifted to the Muslims as a waqf or by way of a dedication or as a grant. They have not been able to establish. The earliest evidence or otherwise what they could actually lay their hands was somewhere after 1857. Now 1857, you all know, in the history, it was the first war of Indian independence. It was at that point of time, riots broke out in Ayodhya. Now, the colonial government which was in power at that point of time, what they did, they raised a 7-foot brick grill, that is a wall which was created by them, to separate the disputed site into two portions. One is the inner structure, that is the inner portion, and the outer portion, which was actually under the exclusive possession of the Hindus. But things did not improve. It was only as a law and order problem that they could actually solve it. Eventually in 1885, one Mahant, Raghubar Das, he filed the first suit so far as the property, the site is concerned, claiming that he should be permitted to construct a temple on a platform called Ramchabutra. Now, the suit was dismissed. However, the trial court gave certain observations which said that Ramchabutra was the exclusive possession of the Hindus and probably they are the owners of that particular portion. Matter was carried in appeal. The district court as well as the Judicial Commissioner of Oudh at that point of time reversed the judgment, and ultimately the suit came to be dismissed, and the portions where actually certain observations had been made in favor of Ramchabutra, that it was in possession and belongs to the Hindus, that was actually set aside. Then we see certain disturbances in 1934. The masjid, which is actually the 3 central domes, they were actually destroyed, and the colonial administration granted certain grants for repair of that masjid, which was actually pressed into evidence to show that this was actually one of the strong evidence that's available with the Muslim party, that it was one of the mosques which was being used by the Muslims and it was their exclusive property. Things did not improve there. Then in 1949, December 1949, on the 22nd of December, an important development took place. On the night of 22nd, early morning of 23rd of December 1949, the idols of Ram were placed inside the central dome of the 3-dome structure. There was immediate, in fact, chaos, and there were a lot of disturbance, and the administration stepped in, which resulted in proceedings under Section 145 of the CRPC. So therefore, both the parties were directed that why the 145 proceeding should not be initiated. Ultimately, the city magistrate imposed 145 proceedings in order under Section 145 CRPC, and also this was followed by an order appointing a receiver. the chairman of the Ayodhya Municipal Trust, municipal body. He was appointed as the receiver for the time being, and he took charge of the entire property. That is the idols and also all other, in fact, articles which were there. Now, this led to the filing of the first suit with regard to the disputed side, which was filed by one of the worshippers. This is suit number 1. This was a suit filed by a worshipper, Mr. Gopal Das, late Gopal Das. He actually, as a worshipper, claimed that here, according to his, that is Sanatan Dharam religion, that is his religious practice, he is entitled to worship the Lord, and he is entitled to carry out the rituals as an ardent faith follower of Bhagwan Ram, and therefore he filed a suit. But this suit was only for claiming a right to worship. Now, in this particular suit, certain orders came to be passed. Then ultimately an injunction order, a permanent injunction, a sort of a permanent injunction was passed by the city civil judge, saying that the idol should not be removed from the temple. The matter was carried in appeal, but appeals were dismissed. So eventually, the idols which were actually there in the central dome of the structure and taken over in the custody, it remained in the custody of the receiver. Now, this was the first suit. Then 9 years thereafter, in 1959, the second suit came to be filed. The second suit was a suit by what we call the sect of Bairagis, a subsect of Bairagis, that is Nirmoy Akharas. They were actually claiming that they are the sheikhs, that is the managers of the property. They are actually in exclusive possession, and they even claimed that there was no masjid in that particular site, disputed site, and as sheikhs, they actually claimed that they are entitled to manage the property because they were actually performing according to them pujas, and they were also receiving the offerings, and therefore they staked a claim that they are entitled to manage the property. And since the order under section 145 CRPC has been passed, which has taken away the property from them, therefore they filed a suit, which was the second suit in 1959. As I said, the suit was only claiming the relief that the possession of the property should be restored to them. Now, this was the second suit which was filed. Then in 1961, that is 2 years thereafter, the Muslim body, that is the Sunni Waqf Board, the Sunni Central Waqf Board, filed a suit claiming that it is a masjid, it has been actually dedicated to the Muslims, and it was constructed on the orders of Emperor Baba, and since then they have been in possession and enjoyment of the property, and therefore they are entitled to a declaration that the property belongs to the Muslims. It's a public place of worship so far as the Muslims are concerned, and therefore the property should be declared in favor of the Waqf, and also with a further prayer that if possession is not with them, then they should be granted possession of the property. So this was the third suit which was filed. Then after almost 20 years thereafter, or more than 20 years, 1989, suit number 5 came to be filed. Suit number 5 is the actual suit which was taken up for consideration both by the High Court and by the Supreme Court extensively. Of course, suit number 3 filed by the Nirmoy Akharas, that was also taken up for consideration in a big way, because certain legal principles have emerged out of that particular suit. Therefore, the fifth suit, when it was filed, it is very interesting from a legal point of view. The suit was filed, the first plaintiff is Bhagwan Ram as Lord Bhagwan, Virajan. The second plaintiff is Asthan Ram Janmabhoomi. That is the land in which Lord Bhagwan was born. So that itself was cited as the second plaintiff. Both the plaintiffs, of course, were represented through one Justice Agarwal, who was a retired judge of the High Court of Allahabad, and he filed that as a friend of plaintiff number 1 and 2, next friend, which in law it is permissible. So therefore, the fifth suit, which came to be filed by the Hindus, and in that particular suit, the two prayers were made. One was for a decree that the entire suit property should be decreed in favor of the plaintiffs, and the second was that instead of the existing building, it should be demolished, and no objection or no interruption should be from any party for constructing a temple dedicated to Lord Bhagwan Ram. So with these prayers, the fifth suit came to be filed in 1989. Thereafter, the Allahabad High Court, all these suits, 5 suits, there was one suit also filed by another worshipper, but that is not much of significance. Eventually, the suit was dismissed as withdrawn in 1990. Therefore, what was left was only 4 suits. All these 4 suits, though filed in the Civil Court of Faizabad, they were transferred to Allahabad High Court, and they were tried by Allahabad High Court as the first trial. Now, when the Allahabad High Court transferred these matters to the Allahabad High Court and for the purpose of trial, as I said earlier, a little earlier, 88 witnesses were examined, more than 500 exhibits were actually marked, and they were taken through a grueling set of cross-examination, and witnesses were subject to the extensive cross-examination, as I said, on facts, expert witnesses, everybody was put to. And when all these things were going on, the Honorable Allahabad High Court actually wanted Department of Archaeology, that is Archaeological Survey of India, to step in and then first submit a report, a geopenetrating report, that is the georadiology, to ascertain as to whether there existed any building over and above on which the mosque was built. Because according to the claim of the Hindus there was a temple, Hindu temple, which was actually built during the Vikramaditya period, Emperor Vikramaditya in BCs. And this temple was demolished, and on top of it, Babri Masjid was built, and therefore the Archaeological Survey of India was directed to carry out a deep geopenetrating technology and submit a report. Of course, the report was submitted by the Archaeological Society of India, which, however, had a lot of anomalies, which pointed out a lot of anomalies. Therefore, the Allahabad High Court, by a separate order, directed the Archaeological Survey of India to carry out excavation, leaving about 10 feet by 10 feet where actually the idols, Bhagwan's idols were actually placed, leaving that particular area to carry out an excavation and preserve actually the result as well as the evidence. Accordingly, the ASI carried out extensive excavation and submitted a very, very detailed report running into so many pages, including photographs of the disputed site and also the photographs of the excavated material and also videographs, etc. Now, having gone through all this, ultimately, the Allahabad High Court sat down to render a judgment. Now, in the judgment as a trial court, the High Court first dismissed the suit filed by Nirmoy Akara, stating that it is beyond a period of limitation and therefore the suit is not maintainable. I am not getting into the details at this point of time, just to put you in contextually background. So far as the other suit filed by the Sunni Waqf Board is concerned, that was also by a majority, because the matter was decided by Honorable 3 judges, and out of that, by a majority of 2 to 1, the suit filed by Sunni Waqf Board was also dismissed on ground of limitation. The suit filed by the Hindus through the next of friend, that was decreed. However, while giving the final relief to the parties, the disputed site was divided into three portions. One portion was given to the Hindus, which included the main central dome, that is where the three dome structures are there, and the portion which is in the courtyard, that is the outer courtyard, where Sita Rasoi and also Ram Chabutra and other places are there, that was actually given as share of Nirmoy Akharas, and Muslims were given 1/3 portion, the remaining. Though the suit was dismissed, but nevertheless, the High Court granted 1/3 of the disputed property in their favor. Now, the matter was carried in appeal to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court, after 41 days of extensive hearing, where, as I said, all, in fact, very, very learned advocates representing both the sides, assisted by very, very able advocates. I must actually say here that the assistance which were rendered by the lawyers to the seniors was absolutely marvelous, and ultimately the Honorable Supreme Court gave the judgment in November 2019. Now, what the Supreme Court said in their final judgment, first, they allowed the suit filed by the Hindus, that is suit number 5. This suit was allowed, and on the basis of possessory title, the disputed site in entirety was decreed in favor of the Hindus. The suit filed by the Sunni Waqf Board, which was dismissed on the ground of limitation by the High Court, that particular reasoning was reversed on extensive discussion that the suit was well within the limitation, and however, that since the Muslims could not establish by way of pleadings, by way of evidence, either that they had ownership of the disputed site, they were not having actually a dedicated Waqf claim, and also they could not establish that they were in possession of the entire property. So therefore, since the ingredients of establishing claim by way of a possessory title was absent and it was not actually convincing, the Honorable Supreme Court did not entertain their claim. So their suit was ultimately dismissed. Nevertheless, the Honorable Supreme Court, exercising power under Article 142, granted that they should be given 5 acres of land in the property, not in the disputed site, of course, because the disputed site, the extent was just about 1,500 square yards. Of course, the central government, when all this actually litigation was in progress, had acquired the property by way of Ayodhya Act 1993, where 68 acres were actually acquired. And if it is possible, the Supreme Court directed that 5 acres should be given out of this. And as far as the Hindu suit is concerned, the suit was decreed, as I said. Nevertheless, the Supreme Court imposed certain conditions, in the sense that under the 1993 Act, where a trust was to be established, the Supreme Court gave a direction that the maintenance, the construction and maintenance of the temple should be actually managed by the trust or any other authority. And also, they gave certain, in fact, directions to the government, central government, that while constituting the trust, the due representation may also be given to the Nirmoy Akharas. Now, therefore, ultimately, with these directions, the suit filed by the Hindus was decreed, the suit filed by the Muslims was dismissed, the suit filed by the Nirmoy Akharas, that was also dismissed on the ground of limitation. And the only suit which was left was the suit number 1, which was filed by a worshipper claiming a right to worship, which of course, in view of the fact that suit number 4 has been, that is dismissed, and suit number 5 has been decreed, giving the entire property to Hindus where a temple will be constructed. Therefore, the right to worship, which was claimed by the plaintiff in suit number 1, was also allowed, only actually granting the right to worship, subject of course to restrictions which may be imposed. Now, this is in nutshell the background under which the Honorable Supreme Court has decided this a very, very important litigation which was spanning for more than 70 years. And of course, as I said earlier, the dispute was more than 3 to 4 centuries old. Now, what are the legal principles which emerge out of this judgment? This is part 2. Now, this is very important because certain far-reaching actually principles have been laid down by the Honorable Supreme Court. Without wasting, because time is at a very, very premium, I will straight away go to the first principle which actually the Honorable Supreme Court has laid down. That is the principle relating to judicial review of the characteristics of a mosque. I would first submit as to what is the context in which this controversy has arisen. It was argued before the Supreme Court opposing the claim by the Muslims, because the claim by the Muslims was that it was a mosque which was constructed in 1528 and this was dedicated to the Muslims, and since then prayers have been happening in the mosque, and even till recently, till about 1950, they had conducted prayers, and therefore this was a mosque which was dedicated to the Muslim public. Therefore, it was a claim which they had. Opposing this claim, one of the contentions raised by one of the lawyers appearing from the Hindu community was that a mosque has to have certain characteristics in Islamic law. The mosque in Babri Masjid did not conform to many of the characteristics which, according to the tenets of Islam, the mosque ought to have. And in that context, the Supreme Court had to analyze as whether a judicial review on the basis of a faith and belief, that whether it is a mosque or whether it is any other structure, would be permissible in law. It's a very, very far-reaching consequences, the observations which the Supreme Court has laid down as a ratio. Because it was argued that in a mosque, at least Asan must be called twice a day. These are all the arguments which was actually advanced before the Supreme Court. And secondly, there must be a place for ablution in a mosque according to the tenets of Islam. Then, near a mosque, there should not be any graveyard. Then a mosque should never be placed or otherwise built next to other temples or otherwise other religious institutions of other communities. Then food in the kitchen is not supposed to be prepared in a mosque. And similarly, a mosque should have a minaret. They should have other special features, and therefore it was not a mosque, and the claim laid by the Muslims is not permissible in law. This is how it was actually put across. Now, the Supreme Court had to deal with this situation, deal with this particular submission, and this is where actually they laid down, after extensive discussion as to what are the tenets in Islam, what is a mosque in Islamic law, what the Quran says, and what the other religious scriptures of Muslim communities, that Idan, etc., they say. After analyzing all this, the Supreme Court came down with very, very important principles. This is going to have, in fact, since it is a constitution bench which has actually delivered this, a 5 judges, it has very far-reaching implications, and therefore this has come to stay as a law. Now, first is, they said, while examining or testing religious faith and belief of a worshipper, it is inappropriate for the court to enter into this domain, and because it is stepping into doctrine of theology. Therefore, where the worshipper is actually his faith and belief is prime. The primary concern or primary consideration is the faith and belief of the worshipper. Having laid down this benchmark, they went on to say that all religions, it is not only in fact confined to Islam, they actually concluded saying all the practice of religion, with no exception, varies according to the culture and social context in which actually the religion is practiced. That indeed is the strength of this Indian society. Therefore, they firmly rejected the attempt to lead the court to interpret religious doctrine in an absolute and extreme form and question the faith of a worshipper. Very, very, very important principle which the Supreme Court has laid down. Again, while discussing the claim made by the Hindus that this is the place where Lord Bhagwan Ram was born, even there also they emphasize that this is a faith and belief that the court should not be in a position to enter into this area and then come to a conclusion whether there was a mosque or whether there was a temple, because it is the firm faith and belief of the worshipper as to what is actually the particular the faith which the person worshipper is entertaining, and that should be the criteria, and it is not for the courts to enter and discuss the religious scriptures and then try to say or come to a conclusion this way is better or that way is better. It's a very, very important principle because this will have a far-reaching implications in the Indian context. This is principle number one. I am running short of time, therefore I will have to, otherwise I can actually elaborate this concept also with the examples which they have given and also as to how they have actually discussed this at great length. This is the first principle. The second, with regard to the plaintiffs in suit number 5, when the Hindu suit was discussed, as I said, there were 3 plaintiffs. First plaintiff was Bhagwan Sri Ram as an idol, and second plaintiff was Asthan Ram Janmabhoomi. That is the place itself, the deity, not the deity, the place where the deity was born according to the faith and belief of the Hindus. That place itself was by sheer exposition of, in fact, a proposition propounded by learned Attorney General, former Attorney General Mr. K. Paraswaran. In fact, he said that the faith that Lord Bhagwan was born on this land, that itself is raised to the status of a juristic person. This is something which has never happened in the Indian jurisprudence or in the English jurisprudence, that a place which is actually given a particular identity is actually elevated to the status, a juristic status, and in the parties, this was arrayed as one of the plaintiffs. Because since this was exposition of law on a new area, therefore the Supreme Court went into very, very great detail. They went into the history as to why juristic personalities have been conferred in law, why actually there is the concept of Hindu idols being given the juristic personality, then as to how endowments in India, the law has developed in endowments, because when endowment is actually dedicated for a pious purpose, the pious purpose is actually the juristic personality. It is given a material form in the name of a particular person or otherwise a particular idol. That pious purpose is actually the juristic personality. That is how the law has actually evolved over a period of time. Coupled with this, if it is actually a property which is belonging to an idol, then whether the property can be actually decreed in favor of land for the first time, an identity that is a land where the Lord Bhagwan was born, Lord Bhagwan Ram was born, whether that land can be given the juristic status. So therefore, this was again a very important principle which the Supreme Court was called upon to decide. And this principle, I must say, by an extensive elaboration of the arguments and also testing it from all possible angles, the Supreme Court ultimately concluded, while idol is recognized as a juristic personality in Hindu law, but land alone, without actually anything else, just on the basis of faith and belief that this was a place where Lord Bhagwan was born, it cannot be elevated to a status of a juristic person, and therefore the plaintiff number 2 had no locus to file the suit. Nevertheless, so far as plaintiff number 1 is concerned, that is the idol, this idol, as it is, had a juristic personality, and therefore through the next friend, the idol can sue, and it can sue and be sued, and therefore the principle which the Supreme Court laid down while discussing this particular aspect is with regard to the juristic personality of plaintiff number 2. Now, this is again extremely important. I need to actually highlight certain issues here. The juristic personality of the first plaintiff, as I said, was not in dispute. Now, what was led was the juristic personality of the second plaintiff, that is the land, that is Janmabhoomi itself, whether can it be a juristic personality. The arguments advanced by learned senior advocate Mr. Parasaran was something which was very, very novel. It was for the first time it had been, in fact, put up in such a manner. What was the argument which was actually placed? In Hindu law or Hindu religion, according to the argument which was put up before the court, idol is, of course, the Hindu idol is one of the juristic personality. There is no doubt about it. But the faith and belief of the Hindus that Lord Ram was born here, that itself is actually capable of being conferred a juristic personality. The reason was that in Hindu religion, the deity, though we actually give a form or a name, it is only for the purpose of identification. Otherwise, there is one supreme being. That supreme being is omnipresent, omnipotent, and therefore the deity is indivisible, and the deity is formless, the deity is shapeless. Therefore, in law, even the very faith that this was the place where Lord Ram was born, that also should be elevated and given a juristic personality. Of course, it has got number of other consequences which will follow. The Supreme Court, of course, did not actually, while appreciated this proposition of law, but ultimately after going through the history of conferring a juristic personality, how actually the juristic personality came to be confirmed on not natural persons. Natural persons, of course, have juristic personality. Not natural persons, how artificial persons, like for example, a company or a corporation, a ship, they have given all these examples. Then they discussed at great length all the case laws which have been cited by Mr. Parasaran or also by Mr. C.S. Vaidyanathan, another learned senior advocate, who again had put up fantastic propositions. The proposition which Mr. Vaidyanathan had put up was, in the context of conferring juristic personality, a land can be actually divided in 3 ways. 1, the land can be bestowed for the pious purpose of the deity. Then 2, the land itself can be a deity. And 3, the land associated with the pious purpose can be given a juristic personality. There are 3 ways in which actually this land could be conferred a juristic personality. Because according to Mr. Vaidyanathan's argument also, he completely adopted what Mr. Parasaran had argued, but at the same time he added more submissions to it. 1, he said that the land where actually, according to the faith of the Hindus, Lord Ram was born, that is indivisible because it personifies the Lord and it cannot be actually partitioned. And therefore, this land ought to actually be conferred a juristic personality. The Allahabad High Court, according to him, made that mistake of dividing the property without there being any suit for partition or without establishing the title of any of the parties and dividing it at 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. This, according to him, was a fundamental error which the High Court had committed. So therefore, while taking actually the benefit that ideal cannot be partitioned, ideal actually cannot be, in fact, it is indivisible. Developing his argument on this line, it was further argued that land which actually personifies the birthplace of Lord Ram, that itself ought to be elevated to the juristic personality. The Honorable Supreme Court went into all the case laws which both the sides had actually presented. In fact, Mr. Parasaran had given the example of Lord Nataraja at Chidambaram, that in Tamil Nadu, where the temple is there, dedicated to Lord Nataraja. He took the example and said, even in that Lord Nataraja's temple, the dancing Nataraja, there is no idol there. Well, what do they call Chidambara Ragasyam, secret of Chidambaram? What is that secret? There is no idol. When you go and worship, the priest will actually remove a curtain and there is nothing there. And that is what they say is the Lord. That is formless, and therefore, in fact, this particular example was given. And in this example, in fact, Supreme Court had, while discussing this particular, in fact, proposition advanced by Mr. Parasaran, in fact, did say that yes, this supports what Mr. Parasaran is arguing. But ultimately, on a deeper analysis, they said that while conferring a juristic personality, the faith and belief of a person cannot actually be the benchmark on the basis of which this can be tested. As they have held in the case of mosque also, that faith or belief of a worshipper, that should be the criteria and not actually what the scriptures say. So therefore, ultimately, they said that the faith or belief of the worshipper will not actually cannot be a ground to say that this should be given a juristic personality. So therefore, the juristic personality which was sought to be given by the Hindu in their suit to plaintiff number 2 was not permitted. So therefore, this development, so far as the development of juristic personality is concerned, that is again a second, one of the core principles which they have actually laid down, because for the first time this was raised and this was actually dealt very extensively by the Supreme Court, referring to various scriptures, referring to various actually the case laws which have been cited from both the sides, and also referring in extenso to the evidence which is adduced by the parties. Then the third principle, the Supreme Court, after extensive analysis of the evidence, both the documentary evidence and also agreeing with some of the findings of the High Court, came to this conclusion. Who has got the title? Now, when it came to question of title, the Muslims actually claimed title to the land on the basis of supposedly grant given by Emperor Babur. But there was no evidence, there was no document, nothing, no supportive evidence to establish that grant was given by Emperor Babur. So therefore, the argument that they had a title, that actually could not be established. Now, if you don't have a title, what is the next best ground on which they can claim title? According to the Muslims, they claimed title on 3 grounds. On the basis of doctrine of last grant. This was the first proposition that they said that since grant could not be actually exhibited, that it was given by Emperor Babur. So they said that by virtue of a continued usage and custom, there was a grant, of course, but we could not produce, or we could not actually present the evidence, and it has been lost. And therefore, on the theory of doctrine of last grant, they tried to establish it. Even here also, the Muslims, they could not establish this, because the evidence, the best evidence that it could be produced by the Central Waqf Board was the gazettes, the travelogues, and documents showing that mosque has been maintained. This was all post 1860. Prior to 1860, that is from 1528 to 1860, no evidence could be adduced. So therefore, there is no evidence, and the doctrine of last grant cannot be actually operate in vacuum. It has to be supported by unimpeachable evidence, which could not be produced. Therefore, even the doctrine of last grant was also not accepted. Then, the next best claim that was put forward by the Central Waqf Board was that it was a dedicated waqf. There was no express dedication of waqf as far as the mosque is concerned. It was only by virtue of customs and usage, and that they were in continuous possession. Therefore, they claimed that by way of a waqf, that they are in possession. They claimed the title. And similarly, they also claimed that since this place is being extensively used for offering prayers and also for conducting other religious ceremonies, it is in their possession and enjoyment, and therefore they have every right to actually a declaratory title that they are the owners. So therefore, they could not establish that there was a grant. They could not establish that the doctrine of last grant also would apply. They could not establish there was a dedicated waqf. They could not establish, so far as possession and enjoyment is concerned, there was no concrete evidence except producing these gazettes and others to show that maintenance have been carried out on the mosque out of the public exchequer, and also the travelogues by people who have actually visited that place, and also by historians, and also by people who have written certain, in fact, historical books, etc. They tried to establish that possession was with them. But since it is a suit, it is based upon probabilities. The probability which is very high, the suit will get decided. Applying this yardstick, the Supreme Court, after extensive analysis, came to a conclusion that even on a probability factor, the theory of that they are in continuous possession and enjoyment could not be established. It was also for this reason the property, that is the disputed site, was in two parts. One is the inner sanctum and others is the outer courtyard. The outer courtyard, in any case, the Nirmoy Akharas, they had actually extensively given evidence that it is their possession, it is under their enjoyment. Therefore, the outer portion, that is the outer courtyard, is in any case not with the Muslims, and therefore the Central Waqf Board could not establish that they are in possession and enjoyment of the entire property. So therefore, on all the counts, their possession, claim for possession and declaratory title was negated. Then, the next question is, could the Hindus establish that the site actually was in their possession and enjoyment throughout? Because, again, the first principle, what the Supreme Court applied to test this argument, the first principle, anybody who claims title to a piece of land has to show that either from a grant or it has to be from an instrument, that is either a sale deed or otherwise a conveyance deed, or otherwise any instrument by which actually particular piece of property has been bestowed upon this particular claimant. Now, so far as the Hindus are concerned, except staking a claim that it was on the basis of the archaeological survey findings that there existed a Hindu temple, because when the Archaeological Survey of India submitted its report, it had come out very categorically in their report. There was a Hindu structure, there was a Hindu temple-like structure, which was actually in the ruins, on top of which the Babri Masjid has been built. To that extent, actually, there are findings of the ASI. So therefore, picking the threads from here, it was pleaded on behalf of the Hindu community that the temple had existed. It was also the claim, though there was no evidence, that there was a Hindu temple built by King Vikramaditya, but there is no evidence that it was built, and there is no evidence there was such a temple existed. So therefore, the first principle on the basis of which even Hindus claim that actually their claim to title of the land is based upon a particular report of the Archaeological Survey of India, even it did not actually convince the Honorable Supreme Court. So they said even their claim on the basis of that there was a temple, in fact, does not meet the probability factor. Then the next argument, that the juristic personality, that the land itself is capable of being conferred a juristic personality, even that was not agreed to because of the extensive finding which the Honorable Supreme Court rendered, that land by itself, it is only the pious purpose that can be bestowed with the juristic personality, but a land alone, because of the various legal implications, that land alone cannot be given the juristic personality. Now, the second argument advanced on the basis of that the land is being capable of given a juristic personality, even that also did not. Then they claim to continued possession and enjoyment. Even that also, the evidence that was actually put forward was not very forthcoming or convincing. So even ultimately, the Honorable Supreme Court went on to decide the issue of title on the basis of what we call possessory title. If somebody is not able to establish on the basis of a title, then when the person who is in possession, if he can establish continuous, uninterrupted enjoyment of the property, he would be entitled to on the basis of a possessory title. So there again, the evidence which actually the parties had left, that was discussed extensively, and ultimately the evidence led by in suit number 5 by the Hindus, that was actually the Supreme Court tested it from all possible angles and said that yes, it is established, if not from time immemorial, at least for the last about 200 years, that this particular property is in the possession of Hindus, especially the courtyard, that is, which comprises of Sita Rasoi, which comprises of Ram Chabutra, and also the fact that actually there was a temple according to the Archaeological Survey report, beneath actually the three structures, that is the three domes of the central structure. Beneath that there was a temple, there possibility there was a temple. Therefore, analyzing all this evidence came to a conclusion that ultimately the possessory title which the Hindus have staked is on the probability factor. It actually came to a definite conclusion. Yes, they have established a better claim on the basis of a possessory title, and therefore the suit was decreed. Ultimately, the principle which they, while discussing this possessory title, they have gone into the aspect of doctrine of lost grant, they have gone into the aspect of Waqf, dedicated Waqf, they have gone into the aspect of extensively the issue of, as I said, juristic personality being conferred on a land. After analyzing all this extensively on the basis of a possessory title, what is the law relating to possessory title? And then they came to the conclusion that this possessory title, in fact, exhibited by the witnesses produced by the Hindus, in fact, it satisfies the test, and therefore the possessory title of the Hindus was decreed. Now, while discussing this principle, again, the court has gone extensively into as to two aspects. One, what is the evidentiary value of an archaeological survey report? Because the archaeological survey report was extensively attacked by the Sunni Waqf Board, saying it is mostly on probabilities, it is on conjectures, it is on what one should say, not on any concrete data. Of course, data has been collected, photographs have been analyzed, the structures, the paintings, the number of artifacts which were recovered, they were all analyzed. But according to the arguments to attack the ASI report, that this is all based upon conjectures and it is all based upon somebody's opinion. Therefore, not much of credibility or weightage should be given to the ASI report. Of course, it is a very extensive argument. I am not able to cover all that. What I am saying is that in sum and substance, the argument was, it is after all a report by somebody and therefore it cannot be given that much of credibility. The Supreme Court then went into the evidentiary value of an expert witness, especially archaeology as a science, archaeology as a discipline, how actually in fact archaeology can be relied upon, the reports can be relied upon. They went into extensive discussion on the validity and evidentiary value of an archaeological report and also the evidence of experts, how this is to be analyzed. Then they came to the conclusion, yes, the archaeological report does indicate that there was a structure on which actually Babri Masjid has been built. Ultimately, analyzing all other things also, they came to the conclusion that this report can be relied upon. The second principle, which they actually dealt at great length, was both the parties relied upon number of travelogues, number of gazetteers, number of, today we will call that as a blog, but those days blogs were not there. So therefore, the writings of historians, the writings of people who have visited those areas, the people who have seen what is happening. Now, the evidentiary value of all these documents, that was also analyzed extensively. While analyzing these, they again went into the evidentiary value of each one, whether these documents can be relied upon, and ultimately gave a broad things. While these documents may be of a contemporary value, but nothing concrete actually could be decided on the basis of these travelogues and other documents, because these documents, of course, is the view as to how a person has observed a particular thing at that point of time, or maybe how he has actually viewed that at a given point of time. They did not elevate it to an experts category, but nevertheless, they said they could be of help and they could actually be of assistance if it is supported by other material and evidence. Then ultimately they concluded that the other documents and all, wherever they found that it is actually at an acceptable level, they gave credence to that and accordingly they decided the matter. Apart from all these, there are a number of other principles also which actually they have gone into. Now, those principles, because of paucity of time, I would not be in a position to actually cover it, for the simple reason, each proposition or each actually the principle, if I take up, it will take at least, because even while analyzing the principles which I have actually shared with you, even this is also extensively dealt with by the Supreme Court. I have not been, in fact, able to cover in entirety the entire thing, because the judgment runs into so many pages. Each line, each sentence, each paragraph is actually, it is worth reading. It is worth noting down that the Supreme Court has really, in fact, dealt with this extensively and in a manner which actually cannot be found fault with. So therefore, while analyzing the other principles, there are certain other issues which the Honorable Supreme Court, I will just briefly touch upon without elaborating in detail. One was, as I said, the juristic personality that has been discussed. Then second, as I said, whether the land itself per se, can it be given or elevated and conferred a juristic personality? Then, whether the suit by the next friend, whether it is maintainable, because in the context of suit number 3 filed by Nirmoy Akaras, because there they said that we are the Mahants, that is, we are actually Shabbaites. Therefore, once we are there, the suit cannot be filed by a next friend. This again has been extensively analyzed as to what is the capacity, legal capacity of a next friend, in what all circumstances a next friend can actually file a suit, even if there is a Mahant, even if there is a Shabbait, even if there is a manager, on what circumstances the next friend can file a suit on behalf of the idol. That has also been discussed. Then they also discuss the concept of de facto Shabbait, because if a manager or a Shabbait is not been appointed by way of a deed, it is only by virtue of a de facto control. If he is managing the properties over a period of time, that is continuously in possession and performing the duties of a manager over a period of time, then only the concept of de facto manager would step in. The Supreme Court has analyzed as to what is the concept of a de facto manager or a de facto Shabbait, when actually a de facto Shabbait can file a suit on behalf of, for and on behalf of the idol. And similarly, in that context, they have also analyzed when a de facto Shabbait is there, whether an extra friend can actually file a suit on behalf of the idol. Even that issue has been gone into. Then the applicability of certain articles of the Limitation Act 1908 and also the Limitation Act, the concept of res judicata, all these issues have been gone into. But since, as you all know, that limitation, res judicata, they are all mixed questions of fact and law, there is nothing, no new principle as such has been laid down. They have analyzed in the light of facts, that is in the light of the evidence, whether a particular plea which was taken by the parties, whether the suit is within limitation or barred by limitation, that was analyzed and a finding was given. Then also the principle with regard to certain provisions of the Place of Worship Act, that has also been gone into by the Supreme Court, because this is, they have said, we are a constitutional democracy where the constitutional principles, it's a secular state, and where the religion, in fact, all religions are equal. And in the context of secular state, the emphasis on Places of Worship Act 1991, that was gone into by the Supreme Court, that has also been commented. And also the doctrine of justice, equity, and good conscience, because ultimately, after dismissing the claim advanced by the Sunni Waqf Board, eventually they have actually, under exercising power under section Article 142, they have granted 5 acres of land to the Sunni Waqf Board. This, in there, according to the Honorable Supreme Court, was an exercise of power under Article 142. So therefore, while exercising such a power, the concept of justice, equity, good conscience, they have analyzed all these issues and ultimately they actually delivered. So therefore, ultimately, the final verdict, as I said, on the basis of possessory title, the suit filed by the Hindus, that is suit number 5, that is the idol, and through the next friend, that suit was decreed, and in entirety, the disputed site has been decreed in favor of the idol, and to manage the temple that is going to be built, they manage the entirety of that particular place because of the religious significance, the religious faith that the Hindus have. The trust has been directed to be, in fact, formed. This is in accordance with the 1993 Act, that is the Ayodhya Acquisition Act, where actually the central government had said that a trust or an authority will be formed to manage the affairs. In terms of that, the Supreme Court has given a direction that within 3 months the trust is to be formed, and certain directions have also been given with regard to the distribution of 5 acres of land, if possible, out of the 68 acres of land which the central government has secured, and also the suit filed by the worshipper, that also should be, that was allowed, giving the right of worship, but of course with the restrictions which could be placed. So after having analyzed all these principles, the Supreme Court have, this according to me is a watershed in the history of the Indian jurisprudence, because not only that, deep-rooted litigation, a deep-rooted dispute has been settled after so many decades, after so many centuries, and even the courts ultimately with a plethora of litigations, everything has been given a quietus, and this judgment therefore is a watershed, and the principles that have been laid down, again, I must say that far-reaching consequences that this judgment has. It has, in a country like ours, it is a secular state where the religions, they thrive, number of religions, number of faiths, number of people belonging to various communities, various, in fact, followers, they all, in fact, have some point or the other, they have actually certain problems, having properties, number of endowments, dedicated in various, in fact, form and manner in which religious endowments have been made. Now, all this at some point of time or the other have actually problem of what you call disputes with regard to property. Now, if one goes through this particular judgment, one will be able to find that the Supreme Court has gone into great details, has laid down certain principles, as I said, has got far-reaching consequences and far-reaching implications, and therefore, this is one of the watershed judgments that I have come across. In fact, for that matter, most of us, in fact, this judgment is actually, again, one must read. There are certain judgments, in fact, like we all say, when there are certain books which one must read, this is one judgment which everyone, whether one is an advocate, whether one is not an advocate, one must read this judgment to understand the philosophy and concept of religion, and also to understand the various faiths and how actually they function, how actually they, in fact, in their normal walk of life, how they actually carry out their faith and religion. That's all I have. Since short of time, I will have to. Yes,
thank you very much. Thank you very much, sir. Wow, that was a wonderful presentation. In fact, the 600 years history about this case was discussed in 60 minutes by you, sir. This shows the level of extensive research and the analysis that you have carried out before coming for this presentation, sir. We wholeheartedly thank you for this wonderful presentation. And I do not have the guts to summarize whatever the speaker has told. And in fact, our participants would not also prefer that way. So quickly, once again, I thank our speaker. And just for the want of time, I would like to move to the next segment. And before that, I welcome Advocate P.V. Yogeshwaran to APLC's webinar. To all the participants, Advocate Yogeshwaran is the counsel on record, and he assisted the senior advocate in this case. Thank you, sir. And then quickly moving on to our next segment, sir, since for the want of time, with your permission, shall we have this segment as a rapid fire round?
Yeah, whatever, whichever way. I am available. Only thing is that others, in fact, we cannot tie down everybody.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
And Mr. Yogeshwaran, you did a wonderful job. I must acknowledge also a wonderful job. Viewers, I must say Mr. Yogeshwaran, in fact, more than me, in fact, you would know much better, because right from the time this case actually was actually being pursued, both in Allahabad, Mr. Yogeshwaran was in fact always, he is actually the sheet anchor of this particular case as far as suit number 5 is concerned. He assisted Mr. Parasaran in such a splendid manner that I cannot say in words. Mr. Yogeshwaran, you did a wonderful job, I must acknowledge.
Thank you, sir. We have to thank our stars for bringing so many stars and luminaries in our APLC's webinar. On behalf of our team and on my personal behalf, I wholeheartedly thank all the legal luminaries who have been present here for this wonderful webinar. So moving on to our next segment, APLC's APLC, Ask the Popular Learned Counsel. Sir, the first question is, even though I beg to differ with the following sentence, judgment was delivered, what about the justice? What I would like to get an opinion on this, sir. What do you think? This is the most prominent kind of a thing which has been prevalent in social media and other popular televisions. So what is your take on this, sir?
You see, as far as the judgment rendered by a Honorable Supreme Court binds everybody. Supreme Court is the highest court of the country. The judgment, once it is rendered, that is the law. That is what the Constitution also says. That once the judgment rendered by an apex court, it binds not only, in fact, the other wings of the, the democracy, but also it has to be followed and it has to be respected and it has to be, in fact, obeyed. So therefore, as long as this judgment stands, that is the law. Justice, now it's a perception. Like what the Supreme Court said in this particular judgment, whether a particular faith or a worship or a tradition or a custom, it is how actually it has to be tested on the principle as to how the person feels. Therefore, justice, whatever in fact that person would feel, a particular individual will feel that this is what is justice, well, according to him it may be justice. If he feels that justice is not there, well, I can't say anything on that. But I am bound by the judgment of the Supreme Court, and that holds the field.
Thank you, sir. That was wonderfully answered. Of course, it is about the perception of an individual, and it differs from person to person. Sir, quickly towing this next question with whatever the first question is. Sir, what is your view on the following? Whenever there is any tension in our borders or any important judgments that are decided in our Honorable Supreme Court, we can see everyone becoming a warfare expert or a legal luminary par excellence. And they start discussions, debates, and deliberations in social media like Facebook and other areas. Sir, what is your take on this, sir?
First of all, one must say there is no expert in any area. Let us be very clear about that. We all have experience, that's all. If a person is there, if he has got some experience, then definitely, but nobody can claim that he is an expert in that particular field. And definitely coming to a social media and start discussing about things which they may have knowledge, they may not have knowledge, well, it is for an individual. They have to exercise discretion before they step into these platforms. Unless and until they have, I won't again say expertise, unless and until they have experience of having dealt with the matters, and they are in a position to express views which not only articulate the views, it is not only mere articulation. You have to actually sustain that articulation. If you actually propose something, then you should be able to actually convincingly establish this, what I am saying is correct. So therefore, unless and until that level of experience and knowledge one has, one should not venture into these things.
Yes, sir. In fact, these people become the controversy's favorite child. So with your advice, I think these people will try to change their views and take a better outlook of seeing things. Sir, moving on to the next question. What difference do you find in dealing with some high profile and popular cases like Rafale fighter jet case versus regular cases which happens in the apex court without any media attention?
I ask a very simple question. Why actually you and me are not recognized? It is only Mr. Salman Khan is recognized, or Amitabh Bachchan is recognized, or otherwise person A, B is recognized. Because they, when whatever they say, whatever they talk, whatever a political leader who is a person of eminence, he talks, definitely that carries in the front pages of the newspaper or in the media. Whereas whatever you and me, we may say, it may not be even in fact, find a place in any paper or any media or any coverage. So it is like this. There are certain cases which by nature are self-sensitive.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Rightly
And
put.
that, yeah.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Please go ahead, sir. Yeah. Sorry.
Now, what I'm saying is,
Yes.
the question was why Rafale jet, in fact, that had a media attention, because for whatever reasons, it was actually, it was sensationalized. And once it is sensationalized, that is what it sells. The TRP rating is based upon what actually is covered by the media. So the TRP rating is definitely, because nobody is going to discuss as to what I purchase or what you purchase. Definitely what actually somebody purchases, and which, in fact, to create sensitivity. That is how actually cases are filed also. It is not that every case which reaches Supreme Court definitely has got some potential to be decided in Supreme Court. But it is the sensitivity by which actually the case is given a sensitivity and seriousness. And automatically it becomes a very serious case.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. Thank you for the clarification. Now, quickly moving on to the next question. Sir, you had an exceptional career in army and equally successful career in law, as you are serving in the capacity as a senior advocate designated by the Honorable Supreme Court of India. Please enlighten us and our audience. Please enlighten our audience one difference you find while serving in army and while you are in practice in the Supreme Court of India.
Well, I must say, though I was in uniform, but nevertheless, I was a lawyer to begin with. I had my practice in the courts in Chennai and Madurai, and then thereafter I joined the services in the legal department. Even when I was actually in the department, I was doing actually the same work that I used to actually interact with the Attorney General, then the law officers and senior advocates, and I was defending the matter for the government. And whether in the Delhi High Court or in the Supreme Court, I was actually doing the same job. It was only that in a different uniform, I was actually doing the job, except that, of course, I was not in a position to argue the matters. But otherwise, I have been throughout most of my career, I have been, in fact, helping the government in litigation. And that is where I picked up actually the, the skills of advocacy. I used to see all these big wigs, big names in the profession, arguing how they prepare, how they present themselves, how actually the cases are presented. That is how and once I decided to leave the service, again, the platform which I have got in service, whatever in fact little I am today is because of the service. I owe it to the service also. But for that, actually, I could not have risen. And the service has taught me so many things. So many things. And yes, for the young advocates, well, I should say that there is nothing but hard work. Everything, whether it is actually we have a case today, we don't have a case, you have to be, in fact, not waste your time. You have to be, in fact, doing some work, doing some research, reading, in fact, judgments, reading books on law, reading books not only of law, but other areas of interest which one may have, science, technology, whatever it is. Like today, you see the thing, I may say that I know something, but in today's context, if like the technology is virtually in fact controlling us, and therefore if you have to be an expert, then you have to be an expert in technology also. That is how a lawyer, I look at a lawyer. The lawyer has to be a master of everything. He's a master, jack of all trades.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. This was what precisely I was going to ask you in the next question, sir. You had just briefly discussed about that. The last question coming up for the day, before we wrap this session, the other questions which are asked in the chat box, those questions will be put forth before our special speaker, and according to his convenient time, we will get the feedback from him. But the last question coming up for the day, sir, having reached this far in life, please share us your success mantra for the benefit of our participants and especially the young advocates and law aspirants who are participating in this webinar, sir. What is the success mantra you have got, and what is the success mantra you would like to share with our audience in the APLC's webinar?
3 words: sincerity, dedication, and being truthful. Absolutely. Sincerity, dedication, that is hard work, and eventually being truthful, eventually will pay in life. There are no 2 words about it. Whether it was, as far as personally speaking for myself, whether I was in the service, before that I was in the profession, I know how I was actually, in fact, I used to follow my senior when I was in the Madras High Court and also in Madurai District Courts. When I was following my senior, how I used to work and how he used to work. It was again, in fact, these are the teachings which actually go down. And again, when I was in the army, the platform which the army gave me, wonderful, wonderful. In fact, I was virtually, in fact, groomed in all spheres of life. That's how I would put it. In fact, the army is one service where you can get trained to be that's why they call it an officer and a gentleman. And therefore, once you are a gentleman, definitely all attributes and of sincerity, dedication, everything automatically will follow. And therefore, hard work, there is no substitute for hard work. And third, being truthful. Whatever we do, whether you are doing it for a client, whether you are doing it for yourself, whether you are doing it for your family, whether doing it for your society, in whatever way, to whoever you are actually, in fact, doing your bit, you have to be truthful to yourself. There is absolutely, there is no substitute again for this. All these things will definitely take you high.
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. That was really enlightening success mantra. I'm sure truthfulness, dedication, and sincerity will definitely pave way for success. And I also wish from my end and also from our team's end a very successful career for all the young participants who are attending this webinar. Yato dharmas tato jayaha, the motto of our Supreme Court, is a very apt motto for this present webinar, and whatever our special speaker has shared as a success mantra, that is what is being reflected in our Supreme Court also. Satyameva Jayate is also one of the mottos which is to be followed by each and every one of us, not with just black and white sense, but in the true sense of taking the essence of the sentence. Sir, with this, we wholeheartedly thank you for this wonderful presentation and for sparing your time in your busy schedule and allotting 1.5 hours time. And in fact, again, I am reiterating, covering 600 years of the history in 60 minutes, sir. No one else would have done this in a better way. We are ever thankful to you, and on behalf of our team, AP Legal Chambers, we wish you a very wonderful career also, sir. We take your blessings, and also at the same time, we wish you a wonderful thing, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
To all the audience, we have with this, we are wrapping up today's presentation, and I hope you all have enjoyed this presentation. And if there is any person who has not received any certificate for the previous webinars, you can just ping us in the mail, and we will be definitely attending to those issues. And as far as these events certificates are concerned, you will be receiving the certificate of participation positively by tomorrow evening or by day after tomorrow morning. So we also have other exciting webinars coming up in the next week, and we hope you all extend the same amount of participation and support for all other upcoming webinars also. With this, it is Anand signing off. Thank you all from AP Legal Chamber, and on my personal behalf, thank you.